Before soldiers run, they panic. Before panic, there's fear, an emotion that spreads between people faster than any cavalry charge. Armies learn that if you can bend what a unit believes is happening, you can break what that unit does next. This episode is about fear as a weapon system, built, aimed, and triggered. And the scary part is that it often works without a single blow. Fear is not only personal, it's social. When one person flinches, another notices. When many flinch, the group starts predicting disaster, and prediction becomes motion. Panic is a chain reaction. Attention narrows, breathing shortens, and small threats feel enormous. Armies exploited that chain like engineers exploit gravity. Fear grows best in gaps of information. If you can make soldiers unsure where the enemy is, how many there are, or what's coming next, you force them to imagine the worst. Imagination supplies free terror. That's why reconnaissance, rumors, and silence can be more powerful than noise. The first step to breaking morale is breaking certainty. Across history, fear weapons pull three common levers. Surprise makes the brain skip analysis. Isolation makes people feel unsupported. And shame makes them hide mistakes instead of correcting them. An army that can combine all three can cause collapse in minutes. The weapon is not steel, it's social psychology. Soldiers don't fail because they're weak. They retreat when the situation feels unwinnable. If your brain concludes the odds are terrible, leaving becomes rational. Fear weapons try to tilt that calculation, inflate enemy strength, deflate your own options, and make every path forward look lethal. Once retreat seems logical, morale is already gone. Fear spreads, but so does composure. A steady voice, a clear plan, and visible routines can interrupt panic chains. That's why armies elevate leaders who can project control, even when they feel none. In the morale system, leaders are dampeners that reduce oscillation. Remove the dampeners, and the whole machine shakes apart. Before modern psychology, armies still knew that symbols matter. Omens, chants, banners, and rituals could raise or crush confidence. Fear loves mystery. It fills blanks with monsters. Commanders used ceremonies to create certainty, or to make the enemy feel cursed. When people believe fate is against them, discipline cracks. Sometimes, you don't have to cut roads, you cut hope. If a unit believes reinforcements are not coming, they start bargaining with reality. Fear weapons amplify that by blocking messages, spreading fake news, or simply vanishing so the enemy feels watched, but cannot respond. The goal is a trapped mindset. Once trapped, morale decays on its own. Morale doesn't fade evenly, it breaks at a threshold. The line holds, then one cluster moves, then everyone moves because no one wants to be last. That's why fear weapons aim for tipping points, not total domination. They target the weakest link, exhausted troops, confusing terrain, a sudden rumor. The break is a social stampede, not an individual decision. Fear feels natural, but armies learned to manufacture it. They created conditions where uncertainty, surprise, and social contagion do the work. In the next act, we'll see the simplest manufacturing tool, noise and spectacle, turning sound into a weapon that hits first. The battlefield starts in the ears and the imagination, and once fear arrives, it rarely comes alone. Noise is one of the oldest fear weapons because it's cheap and immediate. A drumbeat says, "We are organized." Horns say, "We are many." Synchronized footsteps say, "We are coming whether you like it or not." Before a sword is drawn, the enemy's body is already reacting. Heart rate up, attention narrowed. Sound turns anticipation into dread. Humans fear coordinated groups because coordination implies control. A messy mob looks beatable. A synchronized line looks like a machine. That's why drill and parade-like movement can intimidate even before fighting starts. The enemy sees fewer mistakes to exploit, and fear rises because uncertainty switches sides. You start doubting yourself, not them. Flags and standards are not decoration. They are morale technology. They tell your troops where to look, and they tell the enemy what to fear. A banner implies an identity that survives losses. It also creates a story. If you run, you abandon your symbol. Fear weapons use symbols to make retreat feel like shame. Night is a multiplier for fear, because it hides causes. A distant glow could be a small campfire or an entire army. Commanders used torches, sudden flares, and controlled fires to make the enemy imagine larger forces. The goal wasn't to burn, it was to signal danger. In darkness, the brain becomes its own enemy. Chant synchronized breathing, and synchronized breathing reduces fear for your side. But for the enemy, chants can feel inhuman, like a single creature approaching. That's why war cries are often loud, repeated, and simple. They're not for poetry, they're for physiology. Fear is partly lungs and heartbeat, and sound can grab both. One of the simplest fear tricks is to seem endless. Extra banners appear on distant hills. New horns sound from new directions. Scouts report movement that may be supply carts, or maybe fresh troops. If the enemy believes you have reserves, they start spending morale too early. Exhaust their imagination, and you win before you fight. Encirclement is terrifying because it threatens identity. No exit, no control, no future. Even the idea of being surrounded can break a unit's will. Armies used feints, flanking noise, and false signals to create that idea early. Once soldiers believe they're trapped, they stop thinking about winning and start thinking about escaping. An escape is rarely orderly. Spectacle works because brains overvalue what is vivid. Shiny armor, bright standards, and dramatic formations look stronger than they might be. Commanders intentionally choreographed marches and deployments to appear unstoppable. It's marketing under stress. If the enemy believes you are superior, they fight worse even when the odds are equal. Fear weapons are not free, they can backfire. Loud approaches reveal position. Overdone spectacle can make you predictable. And if your own troops rely on noise to feel brave, silence can spook them. The system lesson is simple. Intimidation must be controlled, not indulged. Otherwise you scare yourself too. Noise hits the body. Reputation hits the mind days before the army arrives. In the next act, we'll see how commanders built terror by reputation, sometimes by cruelty, sometimes by rumor, often by carefully curated stories. The terrifying part is that reputation can win battles without any battle at all. Once the story is believed, the gates open themselves. Fear becomes a shortcut. Reputation is a weapon because it saves effort. If a town believes resistance will bring catastrophe, they may surrender early. That fear might be based on real events or on carefully spread exaggerations. Either way, the weapon is belief, not force. The attacker aims to make surrender feel like the safest choice. Sometimes fear is created by a controlled demonstration. An army parades artillery, shows disciplined ranks, or fires warning volleys far from people. The point is not damage, it's persuasion. Demonstrations are designed to reshape an enemy's expectations. Once expectations change, decisions change. History includes grim tools used to force compliance, including hostages. In a family-friendly story, we focus on the logic, not depiction. Fear of losing loved ones can compel obedience. Empires used guarantees to keep conquered regions quiet. It's a cruel math. Trade freedom for safety. The moral cost is enormous, and the fear effect is real. Shock tactics aim to overwhelm the mind's ability to adapt. Sudden attacks, unexpected directions, and rapid tempo prevent a unit from reorganizing its fear. When people can't predict the next minute, they stop planning and start reacting. Reaction is exhausting. Exhausted troops break faster. Fear spreads best when stories feel absolute. They spare no one. They never retreat. They can't be stopped. Even when untrue, such myths travel because they simplify decisions. If the myth is believed, resistance feels pointless. Commanders sometimes cultivated these stories deliberately. The battlefield becomes a rumor market. Some armies used terror signals, destroying property to communicate consequences. We won't depict harm. We focus on the mechanism, fear of what might happen next. These signals are designed to reach people who are not present at the event. The message is aimed down the road, and once the message spreads, resistance becomes lonely. Threats don't need eloquence, they need credibility. Siege armies often sent messages promising safety for surrender and disaster for resistance. Even when the paper says nothing in our visuals, the delivery is the pressure. The defender imagines the worst ending. Fear becomes a negotiation tactic. Morale is networked across towns and units. If one fortress surrenders early, neighbors assume the attacker is unstoppable. That assumption spreads faster than proof. Fear weapons exploit cascading surrender. One domino becomes 10. The war becomes a series of gates, opening themselves. Reputation is powerful until someone refuses it. A disciplined defender can call the bluff, forcing the attacker into real costs. That's why fear weapons are often paired with real capability. If the attacker cannot follow through, the myth collapses. And once the myth collapses, fear flips sides. Reputation works because people trust information, especially scary information. That makes the next battlefield obvious. Trust itself. In the next act, we'll explore rumors, fake orders, and false signals designed to make units distrust their own eyes and leaders. When trust breaks, coordination breaks. And when coordination breaks, morale evaporates. Rumors are cheap, fast, and hard to disprove in the moment. A single false report, the left flank broke, reinforcements are gone, the bridge is taken, can trigger real retreat. Fear weapons treat rumors like ammunition. Fire, wait, observe reaction. The goal is not truth, it's motion. And motion under fear is usually wrong. If you can imitate authority, you can steer an army like a puppet. Fake orders have been used for centuries. Forged seals, copied handwriting, captured messengers. The trick is timing. Deliver the lie when commanders are overloaded and tired. Then the lie becomes action, and action becomes irreversible. Battlefields are noisy, smoky, and chaotic, perfect for signal deception. False flags, misleading lanterns, and fake campfires can make units move to the wrong place. Once moved, they become isolated and scared. Fear weapons exploit the gap between what you see and what it means. Confusion is a doorway that fear runs through. Armies are nervous systems made of people. Capture the messenger, and you paralyze the limb. Worse, you can replace the message with a false one. The enemy then becomes a weapon against itself. Fear grows when units don't hear from leadership. Silence is the loudest rumor. Once deception begins, paranoia follows. Soldiers start doubting scouts, doubting officers, doubting neighbors in the line. That distrust is more corrosive than any arrow. Fear weapons aim to create internal friction, so the unit wastes energy policing itself. When trust collapses, coordination dies, and when coordination dies, even brave people fail. Deception often creates an enemy that doesn't exist. Fake camps, dummy troops, and staged movement can inflate perceived numbers. The defender wastes morale and resources preparing for a giant that is only cardboard. Fear grows because you can't disprove what you can't see. The ghost army lives in the mind. Sometimes the best deception is simply to slow decisions. If orders arrive late, units act on yesterday's situation. Delay causes mistakes, and mistakes cause fear because people sense they are behind. A delayed army feels haunted by the enemy's tempo. The weapon is time, not steel. Coalitions amplify power, but also amplify anxiety. If you suspect an ally won't show up, you start hedging. Hedging creates gaps, and gaps invite defeat. Fear weapons sometimes target alliances with forged letters and staged incidents. Make allies distrust each other, and the enemy fights a smaller war. Fear weapons work when a unit has one fragile source of truth. Smart armies build redundancy, multiple scouts, repeated signals, and clear confirmation routines. They teach soldiers to pause, breathe, and check. This doesn't eliminate fear, but it prevents fear from steering the whole unit. Counter fear is a process, not a mood. Rumors and fake orders can break morale fast, but siege fear breaks it slowly. The next act shows encirclement, how hunger, waiting, and isolation grind hope down day by day. It's fear with a calendar, not a scream, and it often makes surrender feel like relief. The battlefield becomes a clock. A siege is a statement. There is no outside. That alone can break morale because it turns time into an enemy. Every day inside the ring feels smaller than the last. Commanders used encirclement to create inevitability. Fear grows not from what happens, but from what seems unavoidable. Hunger changes how people think. It narrows horizons to the next loaf, the next spoon, the next day. Defenders who are hungry argue more and trust less. Siege armies understood that fear of starvation can force surrender, even when walls are strong. The weapon is scarcity. Sieges compress people into tight spaces, and tight spaces breed sickness. Even without showing illness, the fear of contagion can dissolve morale. People start blaming neighbors and leaders. Rumors spike because everyone is trapped together. The siege becomes a pressure cooker. Siege fear is often quiet. The attacker's camp is steady, patient, and boring, like a machine. That steadiness signals inevitability, which is terrifying. Inside the walls, every creak sounds like a breach, every shout sounds like panic. Silence becomes psychological domination. When hunger and uncertainty peak, negotiation begins. The attacker offers terms. The defender offers time. Fear sits at the table as a silent negotiator. People weigh risk. If we hold, do we die? If we surrender, do we live? In that moment, morale becomes arithmetic. Bombardment terrifies not only because of damage, but because it destroys sleep. Sleep loss makes fear stronger and judgment weaker. Attackers have long used intermittent bombardment to keep defenders on edge. The goal is exhaustion, not just breach. An exhausted defender sees monsters in shadows. In sieges, rumors become lethal. A false report of a breach can trigger panic crowds at the wrong gate. That crowd blocks defenders who need to move. Fear creates traffic jams. Sometimes the fastest path to victory is convincing a city it has already lost. As fear rises, cooperation falls. People hoard food, hide information, and stop trusting neighbors. That internal collapse can break a city faster than any battering ram. Siege fear weaponizes selfishness. Once the social fabric tears, leadership becomes powerless. The most powerful anti-siege weapon is hope. Relief forces, even rumored, can revive morale and force the attacker to hurry. That's why attackers work hard to block relief messages and exaggerate their own strength. In siege systems, information is food, hope is calories. Siege fear is ancient, but the core logic is modern. Control information, control morale. The next act jumps forward into organized messaging, leaflets, radios, and loudspeakers used to make soldiers doubt their leaders and each other. The weapon becomes words, but we'll show it with symbols only. Fear moves from walls to airwaves. Leaflets are psychological artillery. Cheap, mass-produced, and aimed at belief. They can promise safety, threaten annihilation, or simply suggest your leaders have abandoned you. The point is not to convince everyone. It's to convince enough people to create a crack. Once the crack exists, fear does the rest. Sound returns, but now it's targeted. Loudspeakers can call soldiers by unit nickname, mention real places, and create the feeling of being watched. Even when the content is simple, the personalization is the weapon. It turns a battlefield into a conversation you didn't ask for. And conversations can break you faster than explosions. Radio extends fear beyond the front. It can reach rear areas, civilians, and soldiers at rest, turning downtime into anxiety time. Propaganda doesn't need to be believed fully. It only needs to create uncertainty. Uncertainty makes rumors stick, and once rumors stick, leaders must spend energy cleaning them up. Psychological warfare targets specific weak points. New recruits, units that took losses, soldiers far from home, people who feel replaceable. The aim is to isolate them inside their own mind, even while surrounded by comrades. Fear loves loneliness. Once someone feels alone, surrender feels like connection. Even before the internet, armies staged stories. A photo here, a rumor there, a captured letter displayed at the right moment. The method is the same. Create a narrative that feels obvious, then let people repeat it. Repetition becomes truth under stress. Fear grows when the narrative says your situation is hopeless. Promises can be fear weapons too. Offer a safe passage corridor and you encourage movement, often under your control. Even if the corridor is real, it can fracture a unit by pulling individuals away. A psychological trick is to make surrender feel safe, private, and immediate. Once people start leaving one by one, the group breaks. If you can make soldiers distrust their leaders, you don't need to defeat the army, you dissolve it. Propaganda often attacks the chain of command. Accuse officers of hiding the truth, hoarding supplies, or planning to abandon troops. Whether true or false, the accusation is corrosive. It forces leaders to defend legitimacy instead of directing action. Armies didn't only absorb propaganda, they fought it. Clear briefings, shared jokes, rituals, and symbols of identity can blunt fear messages. Humor works because it reduces the threat's emotional size. Truth works because it restores a stable model of reality. Cohesion works because it reminds soldiers they're not alone. Sometimes messaging achieves what artillery couldn't. A unit lays down arms without contact. That's the terrifying efficiency of fear as a weapon. But it also reveals a truth. Those soldiers were already exhausted, isolated, or hopeless. Fear weapons don't create weakness from nothing. They harvest weakness that already exists. Fear weapons evolve, but defense evolves too. Discipline, cohesion, honest communication, and shared purpose can immunize groups against panic. The next act focuses on that immunity, how armies train people to hold when every instinct says run. It's not bravery as personality, it's bravery as design, and it's the only reliable counter to fear as a weapon. Because fear always shows up. Drill is not only for tactics, it's for emotions. When fear spikes, thinking narrows, so training gives the body an automatic script. That script reduces panic by creating predictable next steps. Armies that drill well don't eliminate fear, they channel it. The result is controlled motion instead of stampede. Isolation is fear's favorite condition, so armies fight it with pairing and small teams. When you have a buddy, you have a witness and a mirror. Buddies notice panic early and pull each other back to the group. This turns morale into a network of safety checks. A connected unit breaks slower. When panic starts, a rally point can stop it. A banner, a hill, a crossroads, anything that becomes where we go. Fear collapses options. Rally points restore them. They give the mind a simple instruction. Move there. And once people share a destination, they share momentum again. Fear consumes energy, and exhausted bodies panic faster. That's why rest and food are morale weapons too. Commanders who manage sleep rotations and rations protect minds as much as muscles. In modern language, morale is a limited resource that must be replenished. Starve it, and fear wins cheaply. Fear thrives on surprise, so good leaders reduce surprises. They brief what they know, what they don't know, and what the plan is if things change. That honesty builds trust, and trust is armor for the mind. When reality shifts, soldiers update instead of panicking. Information is morale medicine. Shared rituals convert a crowd into a we. Songs, repeated sayings, and shared meals create predictable emotional rhythms. That rhythm is a defense against panic spikes. It also makes soldiers less vulnerable to propaganda that targets loneliness. When fear tries to isolate, rituals reconnect. Armies teach people not to amplify fear narratives. Don't repeat the worst rumor as if it's proven. Don't stare at the terrifying detail. Focus on procedure, facts, and next steps. This is psychological discipline, attention control. It prevents fear from becoming entertainment that poisons morale. Pride can be protective if it's about competence and care. Units that believe we can handle this are harder to frighten. But pride can become cruelty if it demands humiliation of others. The best morale systems build confidence without dehumanizing enemies. That keeps discipline stable and reduces moral injury later. The decisive moment is rarely heroic shouting, it's a calm choice under pressure. Leaders decide where to stand, what to say, and what to ignore. A single steady posture can prevent a panic wave. Fear weapons aim at these decision moments. Morale defense is protecting the decision space. Discipline and cohesion can resist fear. But the cost is effort, training, and sometimes suffering. When states choose fear as policy, civilians often pay too. That's why the final act confronts the moral bill. Fear wins quickly, but it leaves broken trust behind. History shows the trade-off, and it warns about the line that should not be crossed. When fear becomes policy, it stops being a battlefield tool and becomes a social toxin. People become quieter, less trusting, and more likely to obey in the short term. But the long-term effect is brittle stability. A society held together by dread shatters when the center weakens. Fear can control behavior, but it cannot build loyalty. Armies and states sometimes try to make an example to discourage resistance. Even when the violence is not shown, the message spreads. Civilians change behavior. They hide, they flee, they comply. The weapon is the expectation of punishment. History repeatedly shows that this creates cycles of hatred and revenge. Fear works because humans are predictable under danger. We overestimate vivid threats, follow crowds, and cling to simple stories. Commanders exploited those tendencies long before psychology had names for them. The system repeats across eras because the brain repeats. That doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. Fear can force obedience, but it also teaches people to hate the source of fear. It destroys cooperation and creates underground networks. Over time, fear regimes must escalate because people adapt. That escalation raises costs until the system collapses. The weapon devours the wielder. History forces a hard question. Where is the boundary? Intimidation in battle is one thing. Deliberate cruelty toward helpless people is another. The first aims at fighting capacity. The second aims at humanity itself. The boundary matters because crossing it changes societies forever. Fear as a weapon has a moral map. The best defense against fear weapons is a well-designed human system. Clear communication reduces uncertainty. Care routines reduce exhaustion. Structure reduces chaos. And shared purpose reduces isolation. You can't delete fear, but you can make it less decisive. Fear can multiply power because it changes behavior cheaply. But it always sends a bill: trauma, hatred, mistrust, and future conflict. Leaders who use fear must decide what they are willing to pay later. Sometimes they choose the bill for others. Across centuries, fear weapons repeat in recognizable forms. Noise, spectacle, reputation, rumored deception, siege, propaganda, and targeted doubt. Each tool aims at the same outcome: break coordination. When coordination breaks, morale breaks. And when morale breaks, bodies follow. The pattern is simple, and that's why it's dangerous. We like to imagine courage as a trait you're born with. History suggests it's often engineered. Training, trust, leadership, and routines that keep fear from steering. Armies that understand fear can both use it and resist it. The difference is what they choose to become. Fear has always been one of history's most powerful weapons, because it attacks the mind before the body. If you want more system-first stories told in Tiny Titan style, subscribe and keep exploring how decisions, incentives, and psychology shape the past. The more clearly we see these tools, the less easily they control us.